Welcome to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and I'm a therapist who runs the From Harm to Healing treatment program, an online program for men who have engaged in infidelity or compulsive sexual behaviors within the context of an intimate relationship. I started this podcast to illuminate some of the common blind spots within the treatment fields for compulsive sexual behavior or sex addiction through the lens of the deceptive sexuality trauma model. I hope you find this resource enlightening, particularly if you're somebody navigating the pain of betrayal and deception for yourself. Thank you for listening to the From Harm to Healing podcast. A while ago, I released a two-part series that was taken from a conversation I had with Trish Haight. And we met recently again for another really quite in-depth conversation about the deceptive sexuality trauma model. And then today's episode is going to be the first part of that discussion. If you remember, Trish worked alongside Dr Minwalla at the Institute for Sexual Health. And so she was actually a big part of the development of the DST model that I've been breaking down on this podcast. She was also one of the instructors for the DST clinician training program. And so is really a big part of why I'm doing the work that I do now. She maintains her own private practice in California, where she runs both in-person and online intensives for betrayed partners. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, a certified sex addiction therapist, an EMDR practitioner, a certified partner trauma therapist, clinical partner specialist, and of course, a deceptive sexuality and trauma or DST therapist, amongst many other things. She obviously has an extensive array of professional credentials, but perhaps more importantly, I can tell you that I really couldn't think much more highly of a person than I do of Trish. She's been an important part of my professional journey, and I feel honored to call her a colleague and a friend. And as with the last episodes, I'll include a link to her website and her Instagram in the description of this episode, so please check it out if you'd like to find more information about her and her work. Having said all that, I hope you enjoy this first part of our conversation together.
Well, thank you for allowing me to enter your space and have a conversation with you again. I want to do what we do, which is really create that sacred container through our breath, really hold it and honor what we're going to talk about, which is what it is to be human and not be an object and not be dehumanized and not be split, how to become, in Maslow's terms, the hierarchy of needs, how to become self-actualized in a sense, Anyway, I invite you to close your eyes and notice your breath. Inhale deeply. Exhale, settle. And as we approach this space we're creating together, we're going to move from that extraordinary kind of busyness outside of it, or ordinary, actually, space outside of us, into an extraordinary space of connection, deep listening, centering. So inhale deeply. Exhale, riding the wave of the breath into the conditions of integrity, adequate safety, humility, truth. And then one more breath, take a deep inhale. Exhale, follow your exhale into the deepest connection of you, whatever that means to you. And landing there. Connection to you, to your breath, to your heart, to your truth. Inhale deeply. Exhale, clear the space. Coming back into the space together. It's a nice landing, you know, to be able to sit with you.
Yeah, and I always appreciate it. As we know, the idea of creating extraordinary space. And we've done previous recordings with yourself, with Dr. Minwalla. Something I do in every group process, every group meeting. So important, not just a box ticking thing, not something we just do for the sake of it, but actually a real foundation of the model, of all the work itself. And so I appreciate you leading us in that. And it is great to have you back again.
Yeah.
It's been quite a while now for various reasons since we spoke. And I know the episodes we did before, the conversation we had before, really impacted a lot of people. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation, really looking forward to going into these things again. The back and forth we have, where I think we forget that we're even doing a podcast and we're just chatting about the stuff that we're passionate about. So yeah, it's wonderful to have you here and just to see where this conversation goes today.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I love that. As you say, that back and forth, I always look at it like we're on a teeter-totter together and you're not going to jump off and leave me slam into the floor. I mean, that's connection. That's treating each other as human, really wanting to hear each other and be with each other on that ride of life and conversation for us right now.
You've already mentioned a couple of things, humanization, the model. So much of the model is about humanization. So much of the secret sexual basement, the harm we talk about, is about dehumanization or objectification. So we have some clear topics in mind. And again, we don't know exactly where this conversation will go, but I know these are things you've been working on for many years, but particularly recent blog post stuff you're developing around these topics. So it'd be good to just bring up really wherever you want to go first and start exploring from there.
Sure. I think I'm going to start with something I've already shared, in another time with you, where when I was a young girl, I was always fascinated by what it is to be human. Like always seeking, like, who am I? Like, who are they? Who am I? The constant seeking outside of myself to look, to see what it is to be human, how to be human, how do I become a human kind of idea, ever since really little. Not that I could articulate that or, really make sense of it, but I knew that there was a drive inside of me to truly want to feel like I'm a someone, and I would be at dinner in a restaurant with my family and I would just stray from them and kind of myself because I was so hungry, so driven to understand. And I'd be looking at other tables and just, pulled in to try to get what it is to be human, to breathe, to have emotion, to intersect with another human being. I'd be just drawn in and away from the moment with another person, my family, or even myself, you know? And one of my family, usually my mom, would say, "Trisha, get back to the table." And sometimes she'd have to say it a few times, I imagine. At least she told me that because it took me so long just to come back and go, oh, to that place of, oh, this is what it is. Not that I could make sense of it, but there was a certain kind of relief when I could actually go, oh, land in myself and connect right in the moment with somebody else. Kind of what we're doing here when we take the breath. It's like we give ourselves permission to land and really connect. So I think of me as a little girl in desperation, and moving towards, oh, this is what it is. And not that I did it perfectly, because, if I were to, this is something very personal, probably I'm going to say, if I were to write a book about me, the title would be, My Name Was Object, and then I unfolded. I mean, it's who we all are. We're constantly seeking, who are we? And depending on how we've shaped, it's like, we don't know how far away we are from ourselves, truly, until we stop. So when I look at this model and I look at the iceberg specifically, that gives us such a beautiful map of saying, oh my God, how do we shape, under the water line, above the water, who are we? That's how I like to look at it in those three parts. We have different levels within that. And I think Omar, Minwalla really shaped this beautiful landing point for all of us to really understand, how do we do this? How do we see we are all icebergs? Really trying to live in a world, in this oceanic life, and be real, have a sense of belonging, not be so afraid of being our most authentic selves, truly being able to look towards how we are broken inside, how we fragmented over and over and over again. I think of Gabor Mate, where he says, trauma is not what happened to you. It is what happens inside of you because of what happened to you. And that gives us a really beautiful path into, oh my gosh, look here. Don't look out there, look here. Get brave, get courageous, get willing to slow everything down and look within. I also think of the model, just bringing in some of our beautiful concepts here. I think of those three eyes, the path to really, again, Maslow, self-actualization, to becoming whole, right? We look at those three. The first one being integrity, which is all about being honest, being truthful with ourselves first, so that we understand what it's like to be truthful to others. We have to go to that intrapersonal space, relationship to self, in order to do interpersonal wellness, which is relationship with others. So really landing in integrity, truth, honesty is imperative in order to go to the next one. I say it's like you're pulling on a thread and it hits the other two. If we have that landing point of honesty, then we can hit the next one, which is intimacy, because we're now becoming more intimate. We're becoming more honest with ourselves. We're willing to sit longer with ourselves instead of being driven to burst away from ourselves, And then we because we're practicing intimacy and truth-telling, we're starting to integrate. We're starting to become more whole. And that wholeness, when you feel that, your aliveness just enters the space, and you don't want that drive outside of the self, the drive to escape self. It goes back into that first landing point where there can be a deep sorrow that happens when we connect to the part we lost connection with.
So integration really requires sitting with the light and the dark, like the parts we like, the parts we're comfortable with people seeing, but also those other parts. But as you said, you kind of have to work through a couple of steps to get to there, because until you're intimate with the self, you can go into self-contact. And until you're honest, the integrity of accepting, I actually do have a shadow. There are parts I don't like there. There are things that are painful to look at. I remember doing the 3-part episode, which are probably the most popular episodes I've done on this podcast with Omar, the integrity, intimacy, integration. And that was like the simpling down, the distilling down of the model into 3 simple things. And I find even more so, if I was to distill down even more from there, it's self-contact and using the voice. Omar did the white paper, using the voice. We did an episode about that. Using the voice, speaking authentically about the self. That's easy to say, but that actually requires me to know myself first. So it requires the intimacy, it requires the courage to go inside, to humanize the self as well, linking it to this conversation.
Beautifully said. Yeah. I mean, as you're mentioning, is like, it really takes, it takes a lot of strength to turn towards the self and look into the shadow and into the light. right? And see that internal dilemma that's inside every single one of us, no matter where we're landing. It's in all of us. We always have this internal dilemma that is going back and forth. It's the choice point moment, you know. I'm also thinking about, you know, all of us throughout our lives, thinking of the iceberg again. You know, in order to make contact, that stabilization, those first two levels on top of the water need to stabilize enough so that we can actually come down into the bottom of us. And those first two levels, right, are what's happening above the water. Is with this model, deceptive sexuality and trauma, that's what's happening above there. There's a lot of chaos, a lot of turbulence, a lot of battles, a lot of integrity abuse, a lot of compulsion, a lot of fragmentation, a lot of I can't find me, whether it's the person who did the harm, the abuse that was happening, whether it's the person who is impacted by that abuse of choice and abuse of trust. They're deeply fragmenting and splitting all over, and the injured relationship, family, et cetera, et cetera. And as we, you know, focus in on the partner and the intimate partnership and the person who caused harm to that partnership, as we focus into that, we can see how much splitting is happening and how much tending to has to happen. So stabilization of that splitting needs to happen. And so when we look at the 5 stages, you know, that we know so well, we look at those first 2 stages, which are, let's name the reality, right? Which is that hard mirror reflection. You know, and some people, some other models might call it a shaming model. It's not. It's actually, I'm giving you the truth so that you can do something with it. And I can lift you out of the shame, helping you name it for yourself. So we're turning the light on that. We're lifting them out of shame. We're not saying, oh, let's don't talk about that, which could be shame promoting, you know, if you think about it. No, let's talk about it. Let's lift you out. Let's have a conversation about truth. You know, that creates the next stage, which is that stabilization, which helps them catch their breath. You know, it's like that baby cry. I always love to use that one where the baby is in desperation trying to find settling, and you hear that. And then all of a sudden you hear that. That's what we want to create with the people who are fragmenting. We want to help them feel like, oh, it goes back to what I named as a little girl sitting at a table going, oh, and they're calling me back to the table. And I'm like, oh, that landing point moment where we make a self-contact for a moment, that creates stabilization. When we're not in self-contact, it's destabilization. And we know that. And so we have to stabilize no matter who is coming into the room before we go under the water in any way whatsoever. You know, and we know as we stabilize, the little water starts to surface up. You know, I go back to level 6 now, way at the bottom, and how we shape over time, every single one of us. There is so much splitting that happens with all of us. We are splitting constantly. We are so complex. You know, there's this split. And depending on the person and how they're held, and how they make sense of the splitting that's happening and what they're doing with the splitting, they shape in a certain way from that level 6, which is all about complex trauma shaping. It's the traumas, it's our attachment injuries, it's our relational space, positive and negative, you know, and how we internalize that as little beings, and we can't make sense of it, right? So we go all the way back there and we're like, wow, we shape over time. And not just as we're young. We continue to shape. We continue to have underwater shaping in our relationships as adults, et cetera. It's constant. Think of this trauma. We are now shaping differently because of this type of trauma. Deceptive sexuality trauma, we're shaping, we're splitting. So all those splits, depending on how those happen, the abuser, we're going to start there, can become an object, can dehumanize themselves because they can't bear the splitting that's happening inside of them. They start seeing them as less human. They start functioning outside of themselves. making less contact with the self, seeking something else to soothe, rather than tapping into the unbearable feeling of being shattered. And no one's holding the container for them, making sense of that shattering. Usually the information is, let's move forward, which is leave yourself behind, move forward. That's the messaging. And then if we shift up into 5 and 4, we look at gender shaping and sexuality shaping. We think that adds into the splitting as well. We get all this personal and societal messaging, from our model here that says, this is what it is to be a gender. This is what it is to be in your sexual self, your sexuality. And then all of that pushes up through the templates. And then this becomes our given template, which we know throughout our life, we can't actually change the template. We can create a different pathway with the template. We can become more conscious. And that's the waterline, right? That's a place of consciousness. If we raise consciousness, right, then we can choose our template differently, meaning we can add things to our template of us that are more about the light, less about the shadow. We can feed the light into that versus chew on the shadowing, versus chew on splitting, versus escaping self, etc. So when I go back to the person who caused harm and that shaping, they are objectifying themselves, they're objectifying others, they're dehumanizing self, they're dehumanizing others. Therefore, they will do that in relationship with their intimate partner because they can't bear intimacy, one of the 3 I's. They race away from it because intimacy says self-contact, other contact. It says love and cherish. We go back to the I-thou relationship of Martin Buber that we talked about before. You see the other as human. There's us on the teeter-totter. You will not jump off the teeter-totter. There's a deep trust. I talk about the splitting of that abuser. We also then see the person harmed, the intimate partner, now is handed the splitting. So even if they have split throughout their lives, because that's how we shape as humans, we're complex, as I mentioned, they are now fractured. Their vows, their values, their morals have been shattered at a very deep level. They are in peri-traumatic stress, depersonalization, dehumanization, dissociation, out of body experiencing. They don't know where to land. They're flailing. So now we have 2 people flailing and they can't make sense. And we have to help them have a conversation about that. And we have to help them come into the selves again. So when I'm working with an intimate partner, I need to help them stabilize through stages 1 and 2 before I even get to metabolizing the enormity of what just happened. And you and I know through that metabolization, we find a different landing point. I look at their landing point can be how I like to work with partners is taking them out of that global high intensity activation, which is causing more splitting, which would be defensive orienting, survival instincts, taking them out of themselves in that kind of, I'm going to give it a sound, it's like constant hyperventilation, hypervigilance, hyperarousal, constantly going, seeking outside of themselves, for self. And how I want to help them is come down into center and trust that they can be there and trust their alert system at the same time. But I want to help them trust themselves, come back into self, find self. And it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be excruciating for them because their desperation is about, I need to survive, so I'm going to go up and out. Survival is not about taking time to drop into myself when you and I both know that's where the healing is, self-contact. And also the injured relationship. I mean, I could go on and on. I'd love to hear. I've shared a lot, so I'd love to hear what's coming up for you as well, Yeah,
I mean, there's so much there, so many tangents I would love to go off on right now. I guess I'm thinking about when we think, we'll generally talk about in this model men as the abuser and the partner, she as the victim. I'm thinking about that fractured relationship with the self. For many partners, I'm picturing maybe some existing self-contact that is then shattered and fractured and taken away, and everything is now externalized, and external safety is needed, and so many of the trauma responses are externalized. Then for men, I'm thinking the men I work with, quite often we have the opposite. We're starting from the place, like the starting point is no self-contact. And then I was thinking through what you were saying, you know, the level 654. One of our habits is to start talking about things, assuming everyone knows what we're talking about because we're so passionate about this stuff.
Right.
But the iceberg model, as you mentioned, that really lays out the through line, the deeper underwater stuff that leads to the problematic behaviors on the surface. You have the complex trauma shaping for many men, that there's this human desire to want to turn away from and to defend against and to suppress. But then you have it exacerbated by this level 5 complex gender shaping, because men need to be strong and not show their feelings and not cry, and they need to be stoic and they need to be a workhorse, and all of these messages we might receive. And so you can end up with this situation, I just see it over and over, where there's so much going on beneath the surface, but many men going through life thinking everything's fine, because everything's so suppressed, everything's so shut down. Then we end up in this really just devastatingly sad situation where one person, and again, I'm thinking of the men I work with, completely disconnected from the self, perhaps in denial about there being anything going on down there. But then those underwater things popping up and causing so much harm, so much pain to the partner, to the relationship. And then now this great challenge that we're encouraging men, we're trying to get them to look inside, into self-contact, doing this deep work, at the same time as facing the painful repercussions of the harm that's been caused. Such a challenging task, but such a uplifting, courageous, bold, healing task when it can be done, even amongst that pain. So, I mean, I see it over and over again in the guys I work with. Yes, some people don't want to go near that. And it made me think as well of what you said about the model. Some people might look at the model as shaming, naming abuse, shaming. I think of the truth as empowering, whether it's a good truth or a bad truth. The truth is always empowering, and manipulation of the truth is always disempowering. We know that from this model, how disempowered partners are by living in an intentionally manipulated reality. And so I take great encouragement from seeing men who can hear that word, abuse or abuser, can really look at the harm, be empowered actually by that reality, devastated by it, but also empowered by it and stepping into the work. And I actually see humanization in that, because it's not about objectifying. You aren't just an abuser, you are someone who has engaged in abusive behaviors, and the humanizing thing to do now is to actually connect with that, honor yourself, go inside, get to know yourself. Omar talks about picking up the phone to the self and checking in. All of these things that probably sound very foreign to a lot of men, but it can be so profoundly healing when we can walk that journey. Tons of thoughts, millions of thoughts, but just so encouraging to hear the way you talk about these things.
Yeah. You know, I'm with you. Then when you talk, I'm like, ooh, I could go here and there and everywhere. You know, we do definitely get excited about the human complexity and, you know, the dance of two humans together. And we really dig into that. And because we know there's such a potential for true aliveness for people we see. And I love how you're framing it, you know, when we name it, it gives them power, empowerment, you know, which when I use the word empowered, I go, oh, it's embodied power. It's not a power over someone where it's dominance and control. It's empowered. I'm embodied and can carry that power forward. It's life-changing, you know, to be in that place to say, I'm going to shift this abuse. And I like how you framed the abuser. It doesn't mean they are identified as an abuser, and that's them. They have caused great harm through abuse of trust and abuse of choice. And you had mentioned intentional manipulation of reality, which includes gaslighting, deflection, minimization, all those painful behaviors and tactics that keep someone away from the truth. Again, I go back to that landing point of being human and what it feels like to be human. It's not a concept, just a thought process, because that would be first order change. It'd be that thing that checking the box. I am human. No, that's your cognitive intelligence saying, I've got it. We need to let the cognitive intelligence and embodied intelligence, so the mind and body, come into sync and have a relationship that says, oh, I am human. And there's a depth and a pause. And as I mentioned earlier, a sorrow when you make contact with, I am human. I am someone. I don't have to chase somewhere else away from this part of me. So you were mentioning the partner, there's this externalized shattering where they become altered, they become less human. And they don't even know what it is. So they're seeking outside themselves, constantly looking for what it is and constantly chasing the abuser for information. And the abuser's like, I don't want to say that. I don't want to tell you that. No. Pushing them away. And what they truly need is that information. You mentioned hearing the truth is empowerment. The partner impacted can handle the truth. She spent years not having the truth. She can handle it. If she doesn't have the truth, her mind has gaps in it and she's going to fill it up. And then that's going to be part of her memory bank. And it's going to just get so distorted and twisted. And then she's going to be flailing even more. So it's really imperative that we teach and help guide the men to know that truth is about empowerment. It's about helping the other person land. They can land in the hard information that is devastating. What they can't land in is not knowing, because that's where they're at. They're in liminal space already. Don't leave them there. Help them tether back into the truth, the abuse victim trauma existing reality, what's happening above the water.
And with that, it's, again, this idea, it's so important to me. Talk about it in our groups all the time, that it's not like telling the truth means everything goes well and lying means everything goes badly. The reality is the reason that integrity abuse is engaged in is because in the short term, it helps to avoid consequences. It helps to avoid difficult realities. It helps to cover up for things I'm ashamed that I've done or parts of me that I'm ashamed of. And telling the truth about those things in those moments might be painful. It might cause a rupture. It might cause an argument. It might cause disappointment. I might feel ashamed at my partner's reaction when I tell her the truth. But that's why that idea of empowerment versus disempowerment is so important to me. So telling the truth can be hard, can lead to a consequence. But in the long term, ultimately, people are empowered by the truth. They can make fully informed decisions. You give them you humanize them, you honor them by giving them the opportunity to react how they need to react to that. I humanize myself by being willing to share something that's true of me, even though I'm feeling shame about it or it's going to be painful. So I always want people to hear that. This isn't like a kind of fix it model. Here's the way for everything to just go great. This is actually so much deeper. It's about humanizing, dealing with reality like we talked about.
Yeah, that deep second order change. Again, we land there. I want to highlight something you're naming is, when they choose to use tactics and behaviors that are harming integrity abuse, right? How I like to frame that is they're choosing convenience over discomfort. They're choosing self-preservation over other self and other preservation, which would be, let's create safety in the relationship. There's such a moment of when you choose discomfort, you also choose, I'm an imperfect human being. We are all fallible. And when you come forward with the truth of the harm that you caused, that other person again is going to rest in themselves. Like you said, it's not good stuff they're hearing. They're not, oh, yay, I'm hearing this information. It's a resting point for them, that they're getting to come out of their sympathetic nervous system a little bit and land in the center of them because they're getting information. Someone's naming it for them, especially the person who caused harm. Because you and I can name it constantly, and they're going to feel like that landing point, that landing point, that landing point. They're still in relationship in the microcosm of their life, right? In the macro of their life too, where they are constantly in the state needing to hear it from the other person, the person who caused harm. Because like you named, it's like almost breathing life into another person that you haven't been breathing life into. You've been taking their breath away, creating an objectified person who doesn't need your breath, doesn't need your truth. You know, you and I use the breath, and Omar really teaches the breath, and I along with the model when we were doing the trainings, right? Teaching the breath as a tool to come into contact with the self and with each other and into the truth. We are humanizing from the very beginning. We are creating the pause moment to say, what is it like to sit here with another person who's breathing, who has cells, who has a body, who has emotions, who has defenses? I often bring in emotions or energy in motion. And with that, you know, Omar talks about defenses come in, and I created the defensing. We have to help them defense what's trapping them away from themselves. If your emotions are trapped, you're going to move away from the self and be more performative, which is objectification, which is a form of dehumanization. You're constantly living in that place of, I am an object. I am going to dehumanize. That's how I'm going to survive. I'm going to use integrity abuse. That's how I'm going to survive. I'm going to dehumanize that person. I'm going to squash their emotional self. I'm not going to hold their emotional self. I'm going to split them in two. I'm going to split me in two. Therefore, I'm going to split my life in two, and I'm going to live in two compartments. Because I need that sense of normalcy in my relationship, that I feel like I'm a someone. I am in a marriage. I have a partner. I have a family. And I get a taste of that, and I can't sustain that because I have a shattered capacity for intimacy. I cannot stay there very long. I have a drive to escape that, get a taste of that, and then I have a drive to go into this other compartment, this split life, this duplicity, this place to feed on, escape, a numbing, an entitlement. You know, Omar speaks to the seed of entitlement that gets planted very early on, and how we need to understand that entitlement is truly related to dehumanization. It's a power over another person. It's not an inclusive conversation. It's a unilateral decision, you know?
And we have kind of thinking about the two sides of that, because you have that entitlement, that power over, domination of another, even sexual conquest in the basement, all of these things that involve power over another that can make up for a feeling of deficit in the self, or I need to be in power to be secure. I need to have power over my partner, whatever it might be. But also it can feed this sort of self-dehumanization. I think of every time, so if we separate out accuracy and authenticity, of accuracy, telling the truth about what I've done, true information. We have authenticity, sharing the truth of who I am. So much of the integrity abuse is about the accuracy piece and really manipulating the reality of what's happened to the relationship. And then one of the things we want to move to is authenticity as well. So not just now being accurate, telling the truth, but being authentic. And for so many men, first of all, as we said, they don't really know what the authentic is. Like, I've taken the mask off now, but I don't really know what's underneath it, because there hasn't been humanization. But I feel like the difficulty with being authentic then can be so linked to the sense of, to be acceptable in relationship, I have to hide all of these parts of me, or I can't be true about who I am. And this is not, I'm not trying to paint the guy as the victim in this sort of context, but there can be that just deeply shame-filled, dehumanized sense of self. So to be okay in relationship, I have to be wearing a mask. I can't admit that I have these feelings here, or these thought processes here, or this shadow over here. So we've got on the one hand this above, disempowering, entitled perspective, but you've also sometimes got this almost lower, underdeveloped, shame-filled thing going on as well, and often both at the same time. And both are dehumanizing.
Yeah, beautifully stated. I like that you're bringing in IAR, intentional, accurate, authentic reality. That is such the balm on the wound of intentional manipulation of reality, right? That confusion that an abuser has when they finally take that mask off and they're like, oh my gosh, when they drop into this place and don't understand what it is. They entered the relationship with a mask most often, and when that's taken off, it is shocking for them. And we have to help catch them in that moment, hold them so they can develop capacity to remain in that discomfort of, I don't even understand what it is to be authentic, because they've lived a life, performative for another person to love them. And the fear is, if you truly see what I'm feeling inside, we know this, you will abandon me, you will leave me, you will not love me. All those negative core beliefs flood their system. I'm unlovable, unworthy, unwanted. And so I am holding them as having shaped in a very tender space inside, and how they had to dissociate from that in order to survive. I hold that very carefully. I can only hold it for so long for someone, though, because if they're not willing to look there and they want to keep feeding outside of there, I have to let them go. It's not my work. That's how I teach intimate partners. They can hold space for so long, and then they have to realize inside of themselves, as they start knitting together themselves into that tender spot of, coming back to authenticity and the accuracy of themselves, and that gut brain attachment where they can feel more like they are a human, less an object flailing, less that altered self. When they can get there, then that's where their choice point is, because they have to realize they can't save that person who is not saving themselves. They have to build the muscle to come back into the spine of who they are, land in the deepest part of themselves, the human self they were, and say, I can live without you, in order to make a choice to live with that person. But the only way they're going to make a choice, what I help them teach, is if that person is actually going into that second order change, deepening their work. Going back to the abuser flailing to find authenticity, she, the victim, because we're doing gender here, male and female, she is flailing also to find authenticity and humanity. And therefore, the injured relationship, when we bring them together, the precious sacred work that happens there is profound, because they finally are getting into the depth of what it is to be human with another person. They're developing in truth telling there. So take the three eyes into that space. They're developing integrity, deeper intimacy, and then integration of the we that was shattered, at the very beginning. I know I've shared this with you before, probably, but I like to use Ellen Bader's 5 stages of couples development to understand how the injured relationship is so dehumanized. I like to bring that in, and we don't even know it's dehumanized or objectified. So when I'm doing that work, I like to bring that in, and I say, there are 5 stages of development in Ellen Bader's work of how a healthy couple actually heals. The first one is we start as 2 eyes, 2 individuals, and you meet this person and you enter the space. And what is so exciting about meeting another person that you believe is your person, right? It becomes this huge we space, which is a healthy moment. It's symbiosis. We are a we, and it becomes so big, like almost like you're losing the I a little bit, you know? And what happens is, there is a natural rhythm into the next stage, which is the time is now to start going out and exploring and individuating or differentiating and exploring, which is healthy. And so we're trusting the other person. We're holding them in our heart saying, go explore, go into the world, go explore, differentiate. We need this because we need this in life, in relationship, healthy relationship. We need it to come back into a synergy in the relationship that is all about bringing vitality to the relationship. We say, you are my person. You are a human. I trust you that you're going to go out there and you're going to come back and we're going to build and bloom our relationship even more. However, how I like to describe this specifically with deception is you come in as two eyes, and truly, do you know that person? You're coming in, there's a we. What is that we? Like when we look at it, one person is coming in one way perhaps, and the other is coming in another. And then that restlessness that happens, which is normal for both people, is, whoa, this is a lot. I got to catch my breath. I got to go out there and meet with my friends and etc. Differentiation, exploration. But what happens there for the abuser is they get a taste of that. And deception can slice right through that relationship in that moment, even more so. Because what happens then is they get that taste that I mentioned and they want more. It feels good to be away from intimacy because, again, they don't have that capacity for long-term intimacy. It feels good to have that. And that's when we see even more of that secret sexual basement develop, because now they want two worlds. They want you that represent the family and the marriage. And I am someone, see, someone loves me, etc., which can feel real to them. It's an idea of relationship, though. It's a split life. And then when they fed, as we mentioned earlier, then they want to go to this other life where they feel the escape and they feel the intensity of the escape, which feels like aliveness to them and freedom. And they don't even know sometimes what they're actually choosing. They just keep feeding and feeding and feeding and feeding and feeding. And time ticks on. And then they have enough and they need that tap into life again in different life. So they go back and forth, but they keep it so separate. And they're not bringing true vitality into the relationship. But the person doesn't know because there's a covert abuse. Think passive gaslighting, There's a love bombing. There's a cherishing from the words, the performative words, again, the split self. There's not an authenticity in that moment that you named. There's not accuracy. There's that IMR happening. So I like to look at, when I work with the injured relationship, really helping them land in this. And we have to take them back to healthy relationship development. They have to let the other one go. The other one is dead. That's how we say it. There's been a psychological death in all entities. So we have to land in that place of truth-telling, building intimacy, and integrating it as whole, becoming more human, less objectified,
Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Harm to Healing podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about the deceptive sexuality trauma model itself, you can visit minwallamodel.com. If you're interested in the services that I offer, in particular the From Harm to Healing treatment program, please visit chrisjonestherapy.co.uk.